Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. You know, one of my favorite all-time movies is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. There's a lot of lines from that movie that I remember, but one of them I remember is when Butch and Sundance are being chased by this posse, and they can't shake them. They keep looking at each other and go, who are these guys? Well, when you come to Matthew chapter 2 and the story of the Magi and Herod the Great, you might ask the same question. Who are these guys? And in today's Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School, that's what we want to look at. Who are these guys? First of all, we're introduced in Matthew chapter 2 to the Magi. Now, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who's been born king of the Jews? Who are these guys? In ancient kingly courts, the kings often hired a group of men, paid them, this was their job, to think up wise sayings and to make wise observations about the world. So in a sense, they are wise men, but they're on the king's payroll probably. I'm going to suggest these guys might be from Babylon. They're from the east. Babylon would be probably about 500 miles away. And they might have come across, and would have come across probably in Babylon, the Hebrew scriptures, because the Hebrews were captive in Babylon from about 587 to about 535. And when the captives went back home to Jerusalem, many did not, many remained. And so these Magi, in studying the world, the sky, the stars, all kinds of things, probably studied Hebrew scriptures as well and were aware of the birth of a Messiah that would take place at some point in time in Israel. They claim that they've seen his star in the east. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that star. We don't know exactly what it was. There are all kinds of suggestions. I'm going to send you somewhere if you want to know more about that star. Check out Dr. Paul Meyer's book called The First Christmas. He does a great discussion of that star. You might want to look at that. The other guy I want to spend some time looking at today is Herod the Great. In verse 3 it says, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. If Herod was troubled, Jerusalem was troubled, and I'll tell you why. Herod the Great is probably the best illustration of that fine line between genius and insanity. And he fell off both sides regularly. A genius, master builder. He was responsible for tearing down the Jerusalem temple and then rebuilding the Jerusalem temple. One of the emperors said of that Jerusalem temple, he who has not seen Herod's temple has not seen a great building. Magnificent structure on the hill there in Jerusalem. But he also built some other things. He built a harbor. Israel had no natural harbor, so he built a harbor at Caesarea. We've come to know it as Caesarea Maritime, Caesarea on the ocean. And he built that harbor much like we would build a artificial breakwater today. He put tubes down in the Mediterranean Sea, poured the concrete down in the tubes to force the water out, let the concrete set up in the tubes, and then built the breakwater along those tubes. Amazing piece of building feat for that day and age. He did some other things that were pretty astounding. He was worried that he should be properly recognized when he died, and there was no mountain around that was high enough to suit him for an appropriate burial place. So he had his engineers chop the top off of one mountain and move it to the top of another one, hollow out the inside, and that became his burial place. In fact, in 2007, they discovered the sarcophagus. It had been broken and there was no body in it anymore. But it's at a place called Herodium, south of Bethlehem a ways. Herod was a master builder, a genius, but he was also insane. He did bizarre, horrible things. He appointed his brother-in-law as the high priest, and then got frustrated with his brother-in-law, invited him to a swimming party at Jericho and drowned him. He had 10 wives. His favorite was Mariamne, whom he had killed. And her 2 sons he also suspected of treason and had them killed as well. His own sons, he had them killed. Another emperor statement was that they'd rather be Herod's pig than his sons. In deference to the Jews, Herod wouldn't kill and eat a pig. but he would kill his sons and had killed his sons. Another indication of his insanity, as it became obvious that he was going to die, as he was on his deathbed, he worried that nobody in Jerusalem would mourn his passing, and he was probably pretty accurate. So he had a large number, hundreds of Jewish leaders locked up in the Hippodrome, and gave his men orders that as soon as he died, they should go in there and slaughter all those Jewish leaders so that the city would mourn. The Hippodrome, by the way, is a huge arena that Herod had built in which they held horse races in ancient times. What a horrible thing. Thankfully, his henchmen were more conscientious and more moral than he was, and when he died, instead of killing all those Jewish leaders, they released them. This is the man we're dealing with. This is the Herod the Great of the Bible story in Matthew chapter 2. It's to this Herod that these wise men come, and they say, "Where is he who's born King of the Jews? We've seen his star in the east." And Herod panics. Another king. What am I going to do about this king? It's not one of my sons that they're looking for. So he consults with his own wise men, and they come up with a location. The location is not Jerusalem, where you would expect to find a king, but according to a quote from Micah chapter 5, verse 2, the location of this king's birth would be in Bethlehem. In verse 7, it says, "Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, 'Go and search diligently for the child, and when you've found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him.' When they'd heard the king, they went their way, and lo, the star which they had seen in the east went before them till it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy, and going into the house," notice it's not a stable, nothing about a manger anymore. Going into the house, they saw the child. It's not an infant anymore. Probably Jesus may have been a toddler. And I love that picture of these magi, these people from a king's court from maybe 500 miles away, kneeling down and offering their gift to a toddler who probably wouldn't hold still for that whole situation and is running all over the room. That's my vision of what this visit of the Magi might have been like. Verse 12, "And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way." Herod's paranoia that somebody might be out to get him, maybe it's not paranoia if somebody really is out to get you, and that was Herod's problem, leads him to want to do away with this Christ child, with this new King of the Jews. That's another story for another stuff they didn't teach me in Sunday school next week.